guys, welcome to Office Blokes Reacts. I'm Office Bloke Dave.
I'm Office Bloke
Asda Man.
The Asda Man can.
I'm Office Bloke Daz.
Collectively, we are the Office Blokes.
Yes, we are.
Yeah, we are, and we've got a Patreon page, believe it or not.
Oh, yeah. Go to patreon.com, put in Office Blokes React. Got tiers starting at £1.50. So if you want fancy for supporting the channel, like a load of other people have done, it would be much appreciated. So go and check it out.
Yep, and we've got a couple of other channels worth noting.
Yeah, we've got Office Blokes Try, where we try stuff. Coming this weekend. Get over there and like and subscribe. I don't know when this video is going to come out, but Surstrumming is coming out.
Yeah, it might already be out, might not be out.
Yeah.
Who knows?
Depends. Whatever it is, get over there and like and subscribe.
It will be there eventually.
And we have Office Blokes Podcast, where we do a podcast every Friday night, 6 p.m. British Standard Time. And Mike and I do a special presentation podcast
presentation podcast.
Yeah, it's feature
length presentation.
feature length presentation podcast on the English Premier League every Tuesday.
Yeah, good stuff. So every country England has invaded. Visualised.
All of them.
Yeah, I'm not one of these sort of apologists for British history, because I think the world is one of those things where countries just, I think they still do it, just invade each other. It's about resources. It's about land.
I think everyone was at it, weren't they?
It's about
a few centuries ago,
Yeah.
I wasn't here.
Plus, yeah, I wasn't doing
Exactly.
it. Yeah.
Not to do with me, Governor.
Although I am balls deep into Vikings at the moment and absolutely loving it. And they invade England quite a lot. And I've got to say, I'm on the Vikings side. When you're watching it, you're like, yeah, fuck. Anyway. So, yeah, we'll get into it. Every country England has invaded, visualised.
Possible by Curiosity Stream. Watch all of my videos early and ad-free. A chunk of the past few centuries, this music was the final boss music played for people across the entire world. The English and later the British have been responsible for invading and conquering more countries and people than any other nation in human history. And honestly, it's startling just how many places they've been to. In this video, I'm going to do my best at attempting to visualize all of Britain's invasions and conquests for you, continent by continent, in as brief a time as possible. So let's begin with the closest continent to Britain, Europe. Ireland was the first target of British conquests and was invaded as early as 1169. Within 400 years of gradual conquests, the entire island was ruled by the British and remained that way until most of it was granted independence in 1921. Historically, France has probably been invaded by the English more times than any other country in the world. Just take a look at this huge list of invasions. There's not even enough.
Does it count as an invasion if they just open the door?
I reckon with France, when you invade, it's one of them, you know, where you go like that. And they jump.
Yeah. And that's it.
It's like jump done.
Yeah, I've said this a few times. We are, often described as cousins with America, which I do agree with, because essentially it's a lot of it is settlers from Britain that went over there. I think we're cousins with the French. I think we've got that much of a history of centuries worth of invading each other, royalty marrying royalty, blah blah blah.
Yeah,
I think we're closely tied with the French.
There's quite a bit of Anglo-French sort of phrases and stuff that we still use, isn't there?
Yeah, and I think we're similar to the French, and I think that's why we have a go at them. I think us and the French, we've got a level of, if you go to France and try and speak French badly, go and see the look on their face, and it's the same as us going to every country trying to speak English, pointing at stuff.
I tried it once at where was it? Disneyland Paris. Tried to order something, but it just looked so weird.
Le fish and chip, le chicken sandwich,
le beer,
le chicken pasta,
le Carling, pint of le Carling, please.
By the end of the week, you must have had it down pat.
It was a hideous experience.
Time to talk about a third of these, and for a time, all of this territory inside of modern France was directly controlled by the English, with Calais being the final piece that fell in 1557. Well, except for that time when the British took over Corsica for a couple years. The British continue to invade Spain by the millions every winter, but in the past, they've come with a lot less friendly and
the Great
Still
Tide.
do Benidorm. Britain's invade Benidorm every summer.
That is what he was saying. He said we still invade by the millions every winter.
Right.
So he's talking about the Grey Tide now.
Exactly.
Which I'm all for. Why not get a bit of sunshine on your bones?
Your bones.
Yep. Yep, we'll stick by it.
Mentions. English and later British soldiers invaded under the Black Prince in 1367 and continued on through the 1st, 2nd, 3rd, and 4th raids on Cadiz and that time when the British took over Gibraltar and Minorca. They gave Minorca back, but decided on keeping Gibraltar forever. In recent history, the British have invaded Belgium in order to support the Belgians, but that wasn't always the case. They conducted 2 pretty large-scale invasions of modern-day Belgium in 1654 and again in 1701, and Flanders itself was ruled by the English for a few years in the 14th century. The Netherlands was one of England's historical arch-rivals, and so there's been plenty of invasions going in this direction across the 17th and 18th centuries. In 1940, the British technically invaded and took over Iceland peacefully for a year in order to prevent it from falling into the hands of the Germans. But this was heavily protested by the Icelandic government at the time, so in my books it still counts as an invasion. Italy, of course, was invaded by the British Army during the Second World War as well in 1943, but there were plenty of invasions before then, dating back to Richard the Lionheart's invasion in 1190. Germany, too, was obviously invaded by the British Army in 1945, and northwestern Germany was occupied by the British for 3 years until 1948, but a lot of German territory was ruled by Britain long before then. The islands of Heligoland were British for most of the 19th century, and the Kingdom of Hanover was effectively ruled under a personal union for over a century between 1714 and 1837. Austria was also invaded in 1945, and the southwest of the country was occupied for a decade.
Proper bullies, the arseholes Brits, aren't they?
Jesus. Everywhere.
You know, it's conquer or be conquered back then, I think, in a lot of cases. So
Yeah,
it is what it is. Like I said, I'm not an apologist for this sort of stuff.
Me neither.
There's a lot of people who think it's, you know, disgraceful in the British Empire and blah, 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 but it's something that happened in the past.
It's off the time, isn't it?
Yeah, and countries still do it. They just do it on the sly now. Borders are still changing.
Yeah.
Cyber wars.
Yeah.
Norway was invaded in 1810 and 1812 during the Napoleonic Wars when it was a part of Denmark-Norway because Denmark was aligned to France, so obviously Denmark was invaded during that time as well. Finland, Estonia, and Latvia were all briefly invaded by small units during the Crimean War against Russia because they were all part of the Russian Empire at the time, and of course, Russia itself was invaded then too, as well as in 1918 when the British took over a large chunk of northern Russia for a time in their fight against the Bolsheviks. The territory of modern Ukraine was invaded by British Army units during the Crimean War. The British took over the Croatian island of Vis between 1807 and 1814 during their fight against Napoleon. The British Army had boots and guns on the ground in Bosnia recently between 1992 and 95 fighting against the Bosnian Serbs, and around the same time the RAF also carried out bombing.
Wasn't that a peacekeeping mission though? That's what they called it, not an invasion in Bosnia.
Wasn't an invasion, I would say.
Yeah, it more was really, wasn't it? I think with the UN in there already,
Yeah.
I think.
Yeah. So we can't take full responsibility for Bosnia.
No,
it was
that
a
was-
UN peacekeeping mission.
Yeah, sort
Yeah.
of.
Strikes against Serbian Serb targets in Serbia in 1999. Montenegro was briefly blockaded and invaded in 1913 during the First Balkan War. The British owned the westernmost Ionian islands of Greece between 1815 and 1863 before they gave them back, while Bulgaria was invaded and almost entirely occupied by the British Army between 1918 and 1919 at the end of World War I. Cyprus was a British protectorate between 1878 and 1914 when they decided to just outright annex it to piss off the Turks, and it remained annexed until 1960, except for 2 small chunks that are still British today. Turkey itself was massively invaded by the British during World War I, and part of it was occupied between 1919 and 1923. That wraps up Europe, so let's move on to Asia next. Modern-day Israel and Palestine, as well as Jordan, were British-controlled from the end of World War I to 1948 and 1946, respectively. Lebanon and Syria were both occupied from the Vichy French government briefly during World War II. Iraq was ruled between 1919 and 1932 and invaded again during the Second World War, and again in 1991, and again in 2003. Kuwait was a colony for over 60
Spelled Iraq wrong.
Oh, yeah.
years until 1966. Georgia and Azerbaijan were both invaded and occupied right at the end of World War I for a year. Iran has been invaded at least 3 times, with the most notable example being the joint Anglo-Soviet invasion of 1941. Turkmenistan was invaded in 1918 to prevent Bolshevik influence from spreading any further. Afghanistan is a favorite British invasion spot since it's been invaded in 1839, 1878, 1919, and again in 2001. Qatar, Bahrain, the United Arab Emirates, Emirates and Oman were all controlled by the British until the
crackers
early
in there now.
1970s, while a chunk of Yemen was controlled for over a century between 1839 and 1967. India, Pakistan, Bangladesh, and Sri Lanka were all, of course, invaded many times and outright ruled by the British Empire in parts for nearly 2 centuries between 1757 and 1947. Nepal was invaded in 1814 but never successfully conquered. Bhutan was invaded in 1772 and again in 1864 and was sort of conquered as a protectorate between 1910 and 1948. Burma/Myanmar was invaded in 1826 and was definitely successfully conquered and ruled through 1947. Thailand was briefly invaded in 1945 since they were allied to Japan in World War II, and so was Vietnam in the same year, but that was to support the French government against the growing independence movement. Malaysia and Singapore were each conquered and ruled up until the 1950s and 1960s. Brunei was conquered and ruled up until the 1980s, whereas the Philippines were briefly invaded during the 7 Years' War. China got invaded a lot, and Hong Kong was a colony until as recently as 1997. And while not outright invaded, part of Japan was occupied following World War II between 1946 and 1952. And finally, Indonesia was invaded a bunch during the Napoleonic Wars since it was a Dutch colony aligned to France at the time. Next up, Oceania. Australia and New Zealand, of course, were invaded by the British and established as colonies that each gained independence in 1931. Papua New Guinea was also a British colony for a time, as were the island countries of Fiji, Kiribati, the Solomon Islands, Tuvalu, and Vanuatu. Let's move back over to Africa next, which the British have violently visited a lot. In terms of just places the British outright colonized after invasions, there's the Gambia, Sierra Leone, Ghana, Nigeria, Egypt, Sudan, South Sudan, Uganda, Kenya, Tanzania, Zambia, Malawi, Zimbabwe, Botswana, Namibia, and South Africa, along with parts of modern-day Somalia and Guinea. Senegal was briefly invaded and had some of their coastline taken over in the 1700s, while during the Second World War, the British invaded the French colonies of Djibouti, Madagascar, and Comoros after they aligned themselves with the Nazi Vichy regime, and the Italian colonies of Libya, Eritrea, and Ethiopia, although they had also invaded Ethiopia much earlier in 1868. And as German colonies right before World War I, the British also invaded Togo and Cameroon without annexing them afterwards. For the final area of the world left to
We get about a bit, don't we?
Been
I
busy.
wonder why we didn't touch Saudi
Very
Arabia
busy.
with all that oil.
Why we didn't?
Yeah.
I don't think we had to invade it. I think we
danced
already
around it.
already owned it. It
Sort of,
just wasn't talked about.
Good chums already.
I'd love to, as dull as it'd probably be, the actual history behind a lot of this stuff, why they went there and the politics behind it and stuff, because it's not as black and white. It's just invading a country. Some of it is peacekeeping, or some of it's liberating from
other. Yeah, I don't think just sat there and thought, right, I'm going to invade there, and there.
spin the globe. What's
You
that?
are next. Pack your bags, lads. We're going.
Yeah. It's crazy though, isn't it?
Wonder what they got
Yeah.
in India. Get the boats out.
It's mad that, well, when they showed Russia, and it's like we invaded Russia, but really, if you sent
Yeah.
every Brit over to Russia, we'd still only occupy like this bit of it.
Tiny amount. Yeah.
Could all live in one little city.
Yeah.
We found that out, haven't we?
Yeah.
We don't need that much space. But
discuss, let's move over to the Americas. All of Canada was a British colony until 1931, while Newfoundland remained until 1949. The United States, of course, was a colony until 1776, and was invaded again in 1812, and the modern states of Oregon and Washington were claimed right up until 1846. As far as other outright British colonies here go, there was the Bahamas, Jamaica, Belize, Grenada, St. Vincent and the Grenadines, Barbados, St. Lucia, Dominica, Antigua and Barbuda, St. Kitts and Nevis, Trinidad and Tobago, and Guyana. Besides colonies, Cuba was invaded and occupied during the 7 Years' War in 1762. Haiti was invaded in 1793 during the French Revolutionary Wars. The Dominican Republic was invaded way back in 1655 in an attempt at conquest under Oliver Cromwell. Parts of the east coast of Honduras and Nicaragua were conquered and ruled for nearly 2 centuries until 1819. They sent the Navy to invade Mexico in 1861 to force them to repay some debts, and during the splendidly named War of Jenkins' Year, aka the more lame-sounding War of the Austrian Succession, the British invaded a lot of Spain's colonies, including Panama, a huge one into Colombia, and ultimately Peru. In 1796, the British took over Suriname because it was a Dutch colony, and they were allied with the revolutionary French and later Napoleon. They also invaded Martinique and Guadeloupe because they actually were French during the Napoleonic Wars. Venezuela was invaded in 1902 as part of the so-called Venezuela crisis to force the country to repay some debts they had defaulted on, kind of like Mexico, while Argentina and Uruguay were both invaded during the Napoleonic Wars as well in 1806 when Spain and her colonies were still allied with Napoleon. And that pretty much sums up all of the territory the British have ever ruled and all of the countries this small island has ever invaded. There are a total of 65 countries today who celebrate their independence days from the British Empire. The Empire used to rule over a quarter of all the world's land at the same time and was the biggest empire in human history. And in total, today, there have been 117 modern countries that have been aggressively invaded by the British Armed Forces during some point in their histories, representing a total of 60% of all the world's nations, which is almost the same number of countries that you can watch this video in. YouTube is available in 100...
I like the segues on some of these videos.
Very good.
Would have been easy to tell us which countries they hadn't done.
They hadn't, would it be?
It's nuts. Yeah.
When they put it like that, it's absolutely crazy, isn't it?
It really is, isn't
countries.
I mean, I know it spans from like 1100s to 1900s.
Yeah.
You got a lot of time there.
Yeah.
You know, it's not all done at the same time, was it?
Yeah.
Interestingly, if we did one of those DNA things to see where we're actually from, you know, you're talking in the 1100s, we might not even have been British.
That's it. People moving around the world and people come back to Britain and could be from anywhere.
I think my family would have been Irish because they definitely were only like 150 years ago. They came from Ireland to Scotland and then came to England. So
I think mine was French.
So I was the oppressed.
Oh, right.
That's what I'm trying to say.
Yeah.
I'm the victim.
And you got ginger hair.
Precisely.
That's probably,
Yeah.
that probably signifies something.
It does. Well, you know why? It's there's two theories. There's one that it came from the Vikings, which I think has been debunked now, and there's the other one that ginger hair is indigenous to Britain. But the reason it's been pushed out to the extremities, like the Scottish Highlands, you know, Wales, Ireland, stuff like that, is because the Romans associated being ginger with being pagan. And when they were trying to Christianise the country, they were killing all the pagans. If you were ginger, you were a pagan. So there was it was the massacre of the gingers that doesn't get talked about, the oppression.
We should reintroduce it.
I almost used a different word for eradicating gingers, but it was the connotation.
No,
even as a joke. No, I won't say that. But
no, I'm going to do one of them DNA things.
I think
that'd be quite interesting, wouldn't it?
Why don't we do it for the Try channel?
Yeah, that's a good idea.
If people would be interested in it, maybe people can take bets or guess where we're actually from.
I just don't want like long lost family trying to find me and saying like, oh, you know, it probably lives down the street somewhere and like, you know, you lend me a tenner. It'd be one of them, won't it?
Yeah.
I think this would be more of one of them where it'd say you're X amount percentage French, you're X amount percentage, you know.
Yeah. Are they any good, these things though? Have you heard?
Gainer did one.
They're pretty accurate, are they?
Apparently so, yeah.
Are they?
Yeah.
One of my mates did
Fair
one.
enough.
And he found out that he had a sister living in Australia.
Really?
Yeah, his dad was in the Navy.
So they connect you with
stuff
if you
submit your DNA, this is on like Ancestry DNA or whatever, but one of my mates did it, and it turned out he got contacted by somebody and said it's showing you as I think it's like a large number. They do it in numbers, so I think like if you 5,000 if your number's like 5,000 or around that area, it's blood relative. Direct blood relative, so it'd be your sister or your brother, sort of thing. And some girl contacted him from Australia, and he said the only thing it could be is my dad was stationed in the Navy in Hong Kong at a certain time, and her mum was from China.
Oh, right.
And the dad was Australian, but the dad had died. Her dad had died, and I don't know who she thought was her dad. It turns out that she must have had an affair or a relationship with my mate's dad.
So he hung dong in Hong Kong. It's not the first time I've said that, believe it or not.
You've been waiting for that story.
You've been waiting for that story for years, haven't they?
Yeah. It's crackers though. I mean, I did hear the thing that we had the biggest empire out of anyone in the world, but I never knew the stats behind it.
Yeah, I knew the British Empire was everywhere, especially like in Asia and India and everything, wasn't it? But that was unbelievable.
Well, you look at the Commonwealth now. We have the Commonwealth, don't we?
Of course.
And it's huge.
Yeah,
But
it's
when you look
massive.
at the British Commonwealth.
Well,
Yeah.
the Queen currently is trying to do the Commonwealth canopy, which is building one massive forest across the whole Commonwealth. Obviously, it's going to be separated by seas in places to sort of re-green the world and, you know,
Yeah.
combat climate change. But that's the actual Queen's project, the Commonwealth canopy.
Yeah.
It's called.
Don't get
talked
I've not
about.
heard of that. No, I was going to say I've never heard of that at all.
Yeah.
Very good.
Interesting fact there, yeah.
Yeah.
Hope you guys enjoyed that too. Don't forget like and subscribe, hit the bell and all that good stuff. And maybe you're related to one of us. Who knows? Find out soon on the next edition of Office Blokes Does DNA.
Are you ginger? Yeah, probably then.
Yeah. I'll catch you guys on the next one.
Cheers, guys.
Cheers.